evolutionary algorithms. Obviously, we've been talking about this, but now we can start to focus a little bit on the algorithms themselves. Again, like I said moments ago, it's still going to be a little high level, but now we're going to start talking about specifics that are key for evolutionary algorithms. Evolutionary algorithm is an umbrella term for a lot of algorithms, and evolutionary computation is an even bigger umbrella term. So we have evolutionary computation, and then under that there's evolutionary algorithms, and then under that we have a variety of different specific types of algorithms. And contrary to what some people will tell you, when I teach you genetic algorithms, which is the next topic, when I teach that to you, there's no correct way to make a genetic algorithm. There's no, that's the way you do it. There's still high-level ideas. It's just we get more and more and more specific. And when I do talk about GAs, genetic algorithms, the idea is that as long as your implementation follows the general idea, you're in great shape. That's the idea. That's part of the reason why I love evolutionary computation is, for the most part, a lot of the algorithms are like, here's the idea, do it however the hell you want. You will see as we go, everything in these, all of the ideas that we're going to talk about are very modular. You can plug and play anything and everything however you want, just to change how the algorithms work. Maybe you get different results, whatever. So what is an EA? Okay. So, given the population of individuals, like a population of cars, like a population of permutations of cities for TSP, and they exist within some environment with limited resources, that could be like the finite size of our population we set. We'll only ever have 100 candidate solutions, 100 chromosomes in our population. So there's a limiting factor. And we also have competition. There's some sort of selection going on. Who gets to survive? With all those things, we get the general fitness, which again is an ambiguous term that won't have meaning until we start narrowing down on a specific problem. But the fitness of the whole population will tend to increase. If I'm evolving traveling salesman problem permutations, I might start with just 100 random permutations of 100 cities. Who thinks that those are going to be any good? Probably not, right? They're going to be garbage. But what I'll do is I'll go through and pick the ones that are kind of better. Maybe have them change a little bit with genetic operators, we'll be talking about that, with some variation, and let them persist in the population, and maybe the less good ones start to die off. And overall, although obviously individuals will get better, but the population as a whole actually kind of gets better as well, right? The whole population. There's going to be some things that make it to the next generation that are garbage, but in general, we tend to see the fitness increase for the whole population. So given some quality metric, generate random individuals in a population. TSP, a random permutation of cities. Random car, like those cars that we were driving on that 2D surface, just random car configurations, however we encode that. Apply some sort of quality metric to the function, or the individuals, and the more fit individuals will see the next generation, the population. We apply variation operations like mutation, crossover, survivor, which really isn't a variation operator, but more on those later. And then we create new populations. In other words, where's that image I'm looking for? There. In other words, this is the whole idea. This is an evolutionary algorithm. How you go about implementing it might differ depending on the specific type you're going for, but in general they all follow this idea. Let's say I'm trying to find a good order for the cities in TSP. So I randomly create 100 permutations of these cities. And I've got a population of them. Maybe, there's 100 of them. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have some sort of selection criteria where I will preferentially select those that are relatively good, I will take them and apply some sort of variation operators to them randomly. Maybe I don't. Maybe I just copy and paste them into the next population, like the next generation's population. Maybe I change them a little bit, change the order just a little bit. Maybe I do crossover, the idea of like, well, if this is good, mix them together, pull them apart. Maybe the result's better. Maybe. But we apply some amount of variation, then repeat. Evaluate how good the population is, select those that are kind of good, apply genetic variation, repeat, 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 stop after however long you want, and at the end of the day, you're going to get pretty good results. Yeah?
Just looking at the green loop there, well, after the offspring, you showed that you do this survivor selection. I don't really see how it goes back to a parent selection. Like the way you're explaining it, I almost see it more as like a closed loop at the offspring level where it kind of like loops in on it.
It'll depend on specific implementations. So there's things called steady state evolutionary algorithms, and then there's like generational based. It's still designed to be very high level at this point, and once we'll be talking about GAs next, and that's when we'll be able to hammer out the details on how that might be implemented. This is still very high level for evolutionary algorithms in general. So let me go back. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I already did this, right? Wait, yes. All right, so there's two main forces. There's the variation and selection. And they kind of have conflicting roles. Whenever we make changes to something, we are hopefully, maybe, changing it such that we get a brand new order of cities. That's not in the population. And that variation is important. We want to modify the candidate solutions a little bit and hope that it adds a little bit of variation to our population. We like that. Because sometimes a little variation, sometimes it's really bad. It kills them off because it makes them suck. Sometimes it makes like a benign change that doesn't really cause anything that much of a difference. And sometimes it might make a huge difference. So variation is the mechanism where we're like exploring new things. But then we also have selection, which tends to decrease diversity, kind of. In general, on average, across the whole population. You might, really I should say, like subsets of the population will lose their diversity because there's this pressure to select good ones. So the variations might cause changes that aren't great, where selection will keep trying to focus on selecting parents that are good. Which, if they're all good, they might start to converge on a particular permutation, which might be a global optimum, might be a local optimum. But we got to be careful too, because like anything, sometimes you have to take like 2 steps back before you, or 1 step back before you take 2 steps forward. It's funny, I was watching my kid play with, he's got this little like thing of carrots. And there are all these little different, it's a little wood toy. And there's like 9 carrots, and they're all different sizes, right? And you take the carrots out, you put them back in. But I'm watching him, he's only 1. I'm watching him, and he puts one of the bigger carrots in a hole that's just a little bit too small for it, so it doesn't go in all the way. And then he grabs the carrot that belongs in that hole, but he can't find the hole that this carrot belongs to, because it's already taken up. And I guess it's just, he hasn't really, it didn't click, like, oh, you know, if I'm trying to put all the carrots back, I'll actually have to like take 1 step backwards, take that carrot out that doesn't belong, even though like, you know, it was in there, so I can put the right one in the right spot and then put this one in its actual right spot. Sometimes we have to take 1 step back before we could take 2 forward. Variation is going to be key for something like that. So it might seem like, you know, we're getting a really good thing, but then some variation happens that brings us to one giant different area in the search space, which might be very beneficial. Maybe not. You don't know. So evolution as optimizing versus evolution as adaptation, and static versus random. Okay. What does the word stochastic mean? It's not a trick question. Are you for real? Pardon? Probabilistic, yeah. Yeah, but it's like random. A stochastic process, a random process. It means the same thing. But a lot of evolutionary computation people don't like to use the word random. They use the word stochastic because it sounds a little better. And I'll talk about random search a little bit later, and we'll emphasize the difference. Because when we start talking about randomness, it might make us confused with random search, which is a different thing. Initial population is random. Selection is random with pressure towards good individuals. Genetic operators are random, how we make the changes. There's a lot of randomness involved. And evolution is adaptation versus optimizing. You know, it may be a nuance that doesn't really make any difference. But you know, you can think of, well, we're using evolution to optimize the order of permutations, to find the shortest path for TSP, okay? It's sometimes it's helpful to just think of it slightly different. In that, you know, it's not so much optimizing. I mean, it is, but it is changing the population such that it's adapting to the requirements better. It is a very nuanced, subtle little difference that might mean nothing to you, but it might help some of you, yeah.
If there's pressure towards good individuals, is it true randomness or is there like seeding going on?
Depends on what you mean by seeding, but that's what I mean is it's random, but it's, you know, there's pressure towards good. So the randomness is turned down a bit, for lack of a better term. So EAs have a lot of common features. Populations, they use some form of recombination, mixing the variations. We got that stochasticness, not randomness, but it's the same thing. And this loop right here, this, again, the general idea. This is the whole course, basically. Individual algorithms will differ in some specific way. Some about how they're encoded, what type of problems we like to use them for, how we make the changes. So evolutionary strategies uses real values typically, and then there's genetic algorithms. They usually work with like a string or array of values. You can have discrete values or floating point values there, but they tend not to be as good with floating point values. Now, evolutionary programming uses finite state machines. I don't know why that's two different points. Something like that. Raise your hand if you've seen a finite state machine before. Yeah. If you took 161 with me, I'd totally showed it to you. Remember the little lock example? That's a finite state machine. And then genetic programming uses like a tree structure to usually represent what it's doing. And we'll talk about these in detail later. Most notably genetic programming, NGA. So representation. I've talked a lot about this, and we're going to talk more about it. How do we represent what we need? If I am trying to find a good order of cities, my representation, how do I want to encode that? Because what it means in real life, somebody going to all these cities and the total distance traveled, well, we need a way to kind of like model that in our computer. We need to encode it. So an easy way to do it is just to string an array of the cities in order that you want to visit. Make it a permutation so there's no repeats, even better. The genotype is the encoding. I talked about this the last time. Phenotype is what it means. So sometimes though, and it's interesting, and we'll see a really good example of this. I mean, it's going to be contrived, but it will highlight it. We're going to see a really good example of how the distance between meaningness in the phenotype space and the distance of meaning, like the distance of the values in the genotype space could be remarkably different. And we'll see good examples of that later. Yeah?
Just double checking, what does contrived mean again?
Just like, I don't even know how to explain. Like, overly engineered to describe an idea, but ultimately kind of useless in practice. No, that's not good. It was designed to show you something, even though the actual meaningness of what I'm showing you might be kind of silly. Is that a reasonable explanation of contrived? Yeah. When you see it, I'll point out, this is the contrived thing, hopefully it'll make sense. But we might not get to it today. So we have the phenotype space and the genotype space. We are encoding something. Then that thing that's encoded, that's where we're going to make the changes. That's, it's how we modeled it in the computer. The evolutionary algorithms will mess around with the genotype. And then we'll have to decode it to go back to what it means. I mean, really, if I gave you a string that's just a permutation of numbers between 0 and 99, and you had, the word TSP means nothing to you. If I gave that to you and said, here, decode it, you're going to be like, what the heck? What? That doesn't mean anything to me, right? It's just an encoding. Its meaningness is like the phenotype. So it might be like, yeah, obviously the ordered city, that's TSP. But, I mean, it might seem natural to go TSP ordered city, but it might not be natural to go order of numbers to, oh, it's city, so it's TSP. All I mean is, sometimes going from the phenotype to the genotype, it's easy to come up with an encoding. And if you do it that way, the decoding is easy. But without, you might say like, oh, that's such a very direct representation. And yeah, I would argue it's a very direct representation, the permutation of cities. But there still is decoding going on. And sure, oh, and here's a big one. We need, so the phenotype space, that would be, trying to think of a good example. The phenotypes, let's talk about n queens. The phenotype space is all possible configurations of queens on the board, let's say. We need to make sure our encoding is capable of exhaustively representing, exhaustively is not the right word, of thoroughly, completely representing, like the genotype better be able to represent everything we need it to represent in the phenotype space. Imagine you had a genotype that somehow decoded, like it wasn't capable of decoding all possibilities. Now that might be a huge benefit if we're talking about n queens, where, like 8 queens. 8 by 8 board, if I had an 8 by 8 array, and I had 8 ones that are possible to be in that 8 by 8 space, obviously that can represent, it has the ability to represent every configuration of 8 queens on an 8 by 8 board. But we might want to restrict it, like we were talking about, where maybe we can find another representation that has a constrained number of things that it can be decoded to in the phenotype space, but that constrained one is a good subset, where, well, it actually reduces the search space. So there's like a happy benefit to that. But if you inadvertently do something where you create your encoding, and you're like, this is great, but there's actually gaps in what it can decode to. Imagine if like the best possible solution is in a part of the space that your encoding can't actually represent. When I use words like encoding in space, is that flying over everyone's head, or are you kind of following? Be honest. Raise your hand if you're like, yeah, I'm cool, yeah, whatever. Raise your hand if you're like, okay, all right. All I mean is space is, imagine this room was full of, those like playpen balls, right? Imagine this room was full of them, and I said, find the bright blue one, right? So I'd be searching the space for the bright blue one, wherever it exists. So that's what I mean by searching a space, which makes sense, obviously, in that context, but if we're talking about a TSP, imagine this room was full of those little playpen balls, and it had every possible configuration of so many cities, right? How do I search that space? Ideally, we want the space to have some sort of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like meaning in terms of distance. So permutations that are closer to each other should be closer together. And permutations that are further apart, maybe they should be further apart in the space. Maybe not. We'll talk about implications like this in the next topic. Candidate solutions, phenotypes, and individuals are words used to describe the possible solution. Yeah. Chromosome, candidate solution, phenotype, individual, that all means like a specific permutation. They exist. Yeah. And then genotype, chromosome. Oh, I said chromosome for the other. That was a mistake. Chromosome, the encoding, that's for the encoding version. A lot of times, though, so people that do evolutionary computation are pretty fast and loose with their terminology. It probably comes from the spirit of being fast and loose with the biology terminology, and we just kind of went with it. There is a difference between phenotype and genotype space, but a lot of times we might not put a huge focus on that. And we care about it. We really do care about it. But often if I'm talking to another person that does evolutionary computation, I might be a little imprecise and flip the terminology, but no one's really going to get confused. Confusion would only come up if we're specifically talking about the different spaces of like phenotype space, genotype space, which that conversation a lot of times isn't happening if you're like more of an applied evolutionary computation person. All I'm saying is, I'm giving you terminology. Don't get too bogged down by the terminology. Don't be like, oh man, okay, candidate solution, phenotype, individual, they mean this. But then the encoding or chromosome or genotype, they mean that. Like, yes, they do, but it wouldn't be weird for me to kind of like interchange them a little bit unless I'm trying to be precise about the difference. Just warning. Yeah?
So, if we decode the genotype to the phenotype, it is possible that it gives the solution which is different from the actual one?
We got to make sure our genotype can't, like, if we create imagine the search space is every possible combinations of, I give you an array of size 100, and every cell in that array, every index can have a number between 0 and 99. The number of possibilities is gigantic. But if the problem I'm trying to solve has something to do with that, and that's my encoding, I can fairly confidently say, yeah, well, if that's my encoding, I can definitely take that and decode it to represent every possible thing of whatever it means in the context of the problem we're trying to solve. And so that's good. But you know, if we're talking TSP, if you gave me a string of 100 cities, but they're not unique, you know, maybe they like kind of loop around a bunch, we visit the same city multiple times and we skip cities. It represents an order of cities to visit, which is valid, but we could design it such that, no, it's not every cell can have the numbers between 0 and 99. We'll make sure it's a permutation. Every number must be unique in that string, in that array. And if we do that, the search space is much smaller, and we constrained that space. We made it smaller, which is a good thing. Because suddenly, it becomes like if there's less things to search through, that's awesome. But if we start getting a little overzealous, and we start making interesting changes, what happens if we accidentally start making changes to how we encode the problem such that we have gaps where we can't actually decode to a certain potential possible solution, but our encoding can't decode to that? If that happens, that's bad. Unless somehow we magically know that but the ones that we're cutting out don't matter, like the order of cities to visit that goes city 0, then city 0, then city 0, then city 0. Yeah, that's worth cutting because that's not really going to be a good solution for TSP. It's inadmissible, really. I may be beating this point beyond its relevance. Okay, locus position gene alleles, and then yeah, we'll have a bunch of different words to mean a specific thing in a chromosome, whatever that means in your context. So, a specific city, right? If it's an array of cities, each individual thing, I might call it a gene or an allele, but we hardly talk about things at that level. Fitness function, evaluation function, is a way to measure the goodness of a candidate solution. And it's the function we use to assign quality. But sometimes quality is not obvious. Sometimes the function you use to describe quality might be fantastic or it might be terrible. Depending on how we evaluate them too, might have huge consequences for the shape of the space we're searching. We'll see that contrived example maybe tomorrow. And I'll make sure to be very clear about, like, see, this is what I mean, where we change the coding and we change how we evaluate fitness. They're both valid, but one might be better than the other. Why? Well, it's what the population adapts to. So let's say we want to maximize the number being encoded in binary. Fitness function could be count the number of ones, right? This will be the example that we use with TSP. Basically, I'm saying, and here's the contrived example. Basically, what I'm saying is, I want you to evolve a string of zeros and ones, a binary number, such that we're maximizing the value of that number in terms of what the value it represents. Okay? So if I give you the number 1, see, this is why you never depend on these. You always have to bring your own. If I give you the number 10011 and the number 00111, so what does this represent in binary? Who can tell me? Because I don't want to do it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 16, 17, 19, I guess. Someone verify that to make sure I can do my job. And then this is going to be 4, 5, 6, 7. Right? So if I'm maximizing the value, clearly the top one's better. Right? Because it's got, well, if I want to maximize the value, this one has a better value in terms of what it means, and that's what I'm trying to optimize. This is a contrived example in the sense that you would never use a GA for this. This is stupid. Evolve the biggest number. Why? I'll just write 11111. That's the best, right? Obviously we know that, but as a toy example that we all understand fairly easily, if I give you a binary string, what does that decode to in decimal? And I want the biggest number possible. So how do we measure the goodness of these things? If I just evaluate this in terms of the integer value it represents, the top one's better, and it is. If the population was size 2 and these were my two candidate solutions and my evolutionary algorithm finished running and this is all I got at the end, I would say, well, this one's better, right? Because it's closer to the best value. In the phenotype space, at least, right? Because the best value here would be 31, right? So because 19 is closer to 31, that's the best. It's closest to the best value in the phenotype space. But let's say I gave you a third option, which was 1, 1, 0, 0, 0. What does this decode to? 16 and 8, 24. Great. So this is better, right? Or what if I gave you 0, 0, 1, 1, 1? What is that? Oh, I did that already. We could stick with this. We'll ignore this. We only have 3 things in our population now. So which one's better now? 24, 19, or 7? Obviously, we know basic order of numbers. But that's in the phenotype space, in what it means. Think about the genotype space now. What would be the case for the best possible genotype? 5 ones. How many ones does this have? How many ones does this have? Which one's closer to the best in the genotype space? Even though that's better in the phenotype space. It's weird, right? In fact, we could draw out, if I had nice 5 dimensions. Let's see if I can do this. I probably can't. See if I can draw this nicely. I can completely, this is a very discrete thing. There's a possibility of 32 different values, right? 0 to 31 with 5 binary bits. So I could start with a point here that's 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. That's what this corresponds to. And then I can draw a point that's 0, 0, 0, 1, 1. And they're connected. I can draw a point that's 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and they're connected because their distance is 1 from one another in the genotype space. How many changes do I need to make to this string to get to this? How many changes from this string to get to this and vice versa? 1. Right? And I can keep going. 0, 0, 1, 0, 1. 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And they all have a point. Right? And they're connected. I went through the strings on those. And I can keep going. Well, okay, so now if I do 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, that connects to there. This would also connect here, right? So I'm kind of right now what I'm trying to draw is the topology of that space, such that it's just a graph, really. All I'm doing is describing it, and I can draw it out completely where the distance between the points in the graph correspond to how many changes it would have to make. Yeah?
Topology.
What about topology?
Oh, I'm asking what that means.
Oh, it's the shape and structure of a thing. I don't know. These are sophisticated. I don't know. I've never had to explain it before. How many holes does this have? Wait. How many holes does this have? No, 0. There's no hole. What do I drink out of? This is just a flat thing. There's no holes in here. Clearly none of you know anything about topology. How many holes does a mug have with a handle? 1. You can go through it. You can't go through this. I can go in it, but not through it. Okay, by the way, when I talk about, yeah, okay. Well, if you do that, you might make a hole. So, okay, when I talk about topology in that sense, I'm being kind of silly, of course. Real, that's it's a mathematical thing, but I'm talking about the topology of the graph, right? Raise your hand if you've seen a mathematical graph before, not a plot, a graph. Okay. Raise your hand if you've taken 255. You haven't taken 255?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. Second year data structure. You learned about graphs in 255, right? Okay, thank God. Okay. All I'm showing is that the distance between this and this is 1, and the distance between this and this is 1. However, in the phenotype space, the distance between 1, 0, 0, 0, 0 and 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, what's the difference in the phenotype space? 1. This is 16, this is 15, right? 1, 2, 4, 8, yeah, 16 and 15. So the difference between what that encoding means in the phenotype space is 1, but the distance in the genotype space is 1, 2, I mean, this is as far away as you can go. I would have to change everything. I'd have to change this, and then, oh wait, no. Yeah, I'd have to change this to a 1, a 1, a 1, a 1. Like, I'd have to change everything to make it match. So what's better? How do I evaluate this? Should I evaluate it by counting the ones, or should I evaluate it by what it means in the phenotype space?
If you're evaluating it using that, you could find, I guess, like the shortest walk through that.
Yeah, I mean, as a consequence, yeah, absolutely. In the genotype space, absolutely. But what's the better option? I don't know. We can maybe try it out empirically later, where we'll run it and see what kind of consequences this change has on an evolutionary algorithm. But you figure, both, like, this can completely encode the phenotype space. And I can draw the phenotype space as just a number line, right? And each point in here will map directly there and back. There's a one-to-one mapping there. They're very discrete. I mean, it's a finite space. I don't have like an infinite number of possibilities. So the spaces we can think of, this is the phenotype space. Imagine I like completed it. And then I drew all the numbers 0 through 31 over here. That is the entirety of the phenotype space. But we make the changes in the genotype space. And that has a consequence in the phenotype space, but we are directly altering this. Yeah.
So does a GA obviously it does it learn more the patterns between the genotype and phenotype spaces, or does it actually learn to associate? Okay, if I put a 1 on the far left of this 5-character string, that makes it infinitely bigger than if I put a 1 on the far right.
It's a fascinating question that you just asked. Because in some algorithms that are like optimization algorithms, or maybe it's like a machine learning thing, right? There's a built-in strategy that's like learning, okay? But with evolutionary algorithms, it's the execution of this is what we want, these are your constraints, go. All of the learning kind of ends up happening like outside, where it's that like invisible hand learns, even though there is no mechanism there that's like, yeah, go. It's just following those rules. That is a very interesting, almost philosophical question about evolutionary algorithms. And we'll come back to that once we learn more about it. Like, where does the learning happen, right? It's kind of a weird idea. It's kind of weird, too, because if you take a step back, okay, actually, let me revisit this. Did anybody read iPencil that hadn't read it yet? 1, 2 people? Okay, 3. All right, we'll read it. But it's kind of funny because when we take multiple steps back, remember, I was talking about evolution as this mechanism that just exists in this universe. It just happens. When you think, but we as humans are obsessed with applying meaning to something. And we're obsessed for looking for stuff. Like, we're obsessed for like, well, where does the learning happen? Like, we ask these questions and we gotta know. But at the end of the day, like, what? I don't know. I don't want to turn into like some philosophy echo chamber or something, but we have to be careful about what our expectations are, because everything that we see and observe and experience comes through the lens of me. Yeah.
Just to maybe try and put a practical answer on the question. Could you run maybe like on the genotype level? I don't have any phenotype level. Genotype level. Could you not run like in parallel, kind of like both scenarios and adding ones to like the right and seeing if you can get it forward, and adding it to the left in parallel, and then seeing if you can maybe.
The beauty of evolutionary algorithms is almost always the answer is, yeah, do it, see what happens. Because that's kind of in the space we are. One of the things I heard once that kind of gets the point across I was trying to make about making sure our expectations and what we're looking for are in check is, what color is my shirt? It's green. What? Olive? Okay, fine, yeah. But let's go with green because it's easy, right? Raise your hand if you agree it's green. Of course it is. Where is the color green? I mean,
Certain RGB value.
there's no RGB in this universe. Like, that's not a thing. I mean, we encode colors like that.
It's a certain wavelength.
It's, so there doesn't really exist green. It's just this funny narrow bandwidth of frequencies of light that are, pardon?
That only some people can see.
Interesting point even more. It's, yeah, some people can't even see like differences in certain colors. But the point is, colors don't exist. Our brain differentiates the different wavelengths of colors into colors, but in reality, like, there's no such thing as green. If I was like there are like certain animals that can see a little bit past infrared, right? We can't do that. So to us, those colors don't exist. They're not there. We know what it means, but that's, but we're obsessed with finding meaning in crap, right? Whatever. Let's not go down that rabbit hole. All right, population, it's a collection of chromosomes. A multi-set of genotypes. I'm getting fancy with my words. I shouldn't even say typically. A lot, like, for me, if I'm ever writing one, it's going to be like a fixed size, where it's like my population size is 100. But that doesn't need to be the case. By having a fixed size, though, that's kind of like our limiting resource. There's only so many spots. And over time, the population, the average fitness will hopefully improve, if it's doing any good. But diversity in a population is also, so we also like diversity, and diversity of a population is some measure of how different the candidate solutions are. There's no, it's in the same way of like, well, what's the best fitness function? Like this, do I count the ones or do I go with what it means in the phenotype space? What's the best fitness function? I don't know. What's the best way to measure a diversity of candidate solutions? There's a bunch of different ways you could do it. But diversity is also something else we might like to quantify somehow. We lived, I think love is supposed to be what it says. Selection is a stochastic mechanism that selects who will be allowed to create offspring and or proceed to the next generation. The nuances of how we do this will depend on the implementation, not only on like, well, is it a GA or GP or evolutionary strategy, but also on my implementation of a GA. And your implementation of a GA might be different. Stochastic, but still like probabilistic in the sense that we do have some sort of pressure to select those that are relatively good. We don't always want to select the worst candidate solutions and have them go to the next generation, because that's probably not going to be very helpful. But it's also not good to always pick the best ones, because if you do, that might just destroy diversity real quickly. And we might have what we call premature convergence, and no one likes that. Better candidate solutions have a higher chance to be selected, and many different algorithms to do this, and we'll talk about them all. And again, the differences are not only between GA, GP, evolutionary strategies, but also between the different implementations. This is kind of also what I mean about that modularity of, like, oh, well, which selection technique do you want to use? Do you want to use that? All right, just make that your selection function. Or you want to use that one? All right, switch it out for that function and hit run. It'll still work. Roulette wheel, round robin, those are like the two popular ones. Round robin's the easiest, always use it. Genetic operation variations, create a new individual based on old ones. Mutation, it'll act on a single chromosome. It only involves one chromosome typically. Small changes, random changes, stochastic chance to happen. There's a lot of randomness in here. Yeah?
So like, would a mutation on TSP be, like, obviously you can't have the same city, or you shouldn't have the same city under plus you'll miss one, if, you know, that's a big blank.
Yeah.
But like, would that be an example of you have a mutation act on two chromosomes and you just swap two cities?
Well, that would still be, well, it would be on one chromosome, but you might swap two cities within the chromosome.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that is like the default mutation for when you have a permutation problem. Because if you do like, if you just change one, well, you've just screwed up the fact that it's a permutation, right? Unless you just randomly pick the same number to replace it with, which is unlikely. Anyways. Most of the time, mutations are crap. Most of the time, when a mutation happens, it's not going to be good. But sometimes it is. We like that. So for example, if we have a bit string that somehow decodes to the phenotype space of that elephant, I don't know how, but there's some magic decoding strategy that I'm not aware of, that if you decode the string 11111111, you get that elephant. But then somehow this mutation happens, and we change the fourth one, or the however you want to count, 0, 1, 2, third one to a 0, and suddenly, oh, it has this change. It looks like this change is probably benign, doesn't really have a consequence, it's just a different color now. So then there's crossover / recombination. I always use the word crossover, and this will act on two chromosomes. If two parents are good, and we allow them to have a baby, whatever that means in the context of the problem, maybe their offspring will be good too. Maybe they'll be better, maybe they'll be worse, but you know, let's see. Randomness everywhere. We have these two elephants. Now we have an orange and a gray one. Here's crossover. We've got this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7-bit string. That's all ones, that's all zeros. Don't ask me why on the previous thing all ones was a gray elephant and now it's, I don't know, I guess it just happened that way. But here's a crossover. I've got the two parents. This is an example of what we would call one-point crossover. One-point crossover is fantastic. Where you just pick a point and then swap everything between the two at that point. Done. Not too complex, right? This is something you can give a first year to do. And then there's something called survivor selection. How you do this really depends on the specific implementation. There are generally two categories. Like I was talking, Matt was asking moments before. There's steady state evolutionary algorithms and then like more discrete ones. We'll talk about the differences later once we start talking about specific implementations. But yeah, not everyone has a chance to reproduce, right? The less fit ones never had a chance. Sorry. So how do we fill up the next generation? You know, how do we determine how we want to do that? Right? Do we just always replace the least good ones in the population? Or do we create a whole new population and fill it up? Those are kind of the key differences between steady state and the discrete one. Bunch of different ways. Whatever. Cool. All right, we'll stop here. All right, I'll see you all tomorrow.